Brace yourself.
I've always held the idea of Steam Early Access with a level of caution. In this world of day one patches and missing content, the idea of purchasing a game before it's confirmed to be finished never sat well with me. The chronic abuse of the system hasn't done much for my confidence in the service either, but I'll admit that I've seen some curious cases in the Steam store before, like Darkest Dungeon or Audiosurf 2. But one early access game that caught my eye the most was a horror game called Layers of Fear from Poland's Bloober Team. My initial impressions of the game on Twitch streams were at first quite high. It was a rich and detailed horror game, but the mind-bending environments are what immediately got me interested. It appeared to take much of the distorted reality of PT, but add a little bit more elaboration and coherence in its puzzles. Oddly though, the PT comparisons are what also made me start to dislike Layers of Fear. Some scenes seemed like carbon copies of scenes from PT, and it started to become clear that Layers of Fear wasn't making much of an effort to hide Kojima and Del Toro's influence. But during this year's horror marathon with my friend Matt, I caved and broke my early access hymen. Layers of Fear became the first game that I paid money for while it was still in early access, and, well, let's just say that there's a lot to talk about with this one. The idea of Layers of Fear is that the house you explore was supposedly owned by a mentally unstable artist, whose paintings detail an eerie history of madness. As the game progresses, you discover items related to the artist, his acquaintances, and his subjects, thickening an already textured plot with mystery. From creepy dolls to warped phonograph music, the mansion you explore manages to unsettle regularly, leaving very little familiar or comfortable scenery to observe. As I said earlier, Layers of Fear takes a substantial amount of influence from Konami's PT, most notably the use of the impossible space. The impossible space is a philosophy where how someone explores a location doesn't logically translate to real-world geometry. In Layers of Fear, the hallways and passages possess structure that can't exist in the real world. A door you just walk through can somehow lead to an entirely different room when walked through again. A long straight hallway can instantly lead to the same room you just saw minutes ago. It's a special trick that can only exist in the world of fiction, but in Layers of Fear this creates very mind-bending in-game architecture. It distorts the player's sense of spatial awareness, developing a thick labyrinth with no concrete finish line, and as always, without that understanding and coherence, the fear will be created as well. To complement the impossible space, Layers of Fear uses one more, even more impressive trick, the kind that can also only exist in fiction. First-person perspectives have become commonplace in video games and visual arts in general, but Layers of Fear's combination of first-person viewpoints and the impossible space lead to some startlingly twisted level design. First-person viewpoints operate under the communications theory of framing. Everything within the frame, in this case our first-person view, is treated as a part of our reality, while everything outside of the frame is independent and unseen. How a scene is framed can determine the meaning in which we process the scene, and a simple move of the frame can change our interpretation of this scene entirely. What the first-person perspective does is hide certain parts of the world from our view, allowing them to move and operate independently without producing immersion-breaking events, like giant moving rooms. The only things we see happening are what is in our immediate view, and everything else can break whatever physical or chemical laws are in place. In the case of Layers of Fear, the impossible space lives because of this use of framing. Since we don't actually see the rooms behind the door we just entered, they can easily morph and change into something we've seen before, or something that couldn't exist under logical geometric conditions. Even better, Layers of Fear can remove certain elements immediately, like removing a door from a room once the player's back is turned for just a few seconds, only to continue this until no doors remain in the room at all. For a while anyways. Layers of Fear's use of perspective is shockingly sharp, as even the most subtle of camera motions can open enormous spaces of change, leaving the player's mental balance in shambles. Layers of Fear paces these changes well, with visual cues like organic lighting and directorial objects to lead the player toward the next mind-bending room. Really, it uses the first-person perspective in a very creative way. Bloober Team conscientiously understood the limitations of what is seen on screen. But even better, they understood the limitations of what isn't. What isn't seen is fair game to change and contort, and without any real logical construction or explanation of the events, the player is rarely left in a state of comfort. Layers of Fear is one of those little indie gems that also manages to reinvent an entire volume of game design philosophy in just a few hours. Thanks to an attentive eye on the use of perspective framing in regard to game design, Bloober Team's vision of a mad artist is able to sit firmly in the realm of interactive media. The player is never able to fully grasp the rules of the world they explore, and Bloober Team knows this. I'm eager to see the final form of Layers of Fear, but if you're curious to see this horror gem, I can recommend it even in early access form. It's not just a spooky and atmospheric horror game, it's also a calculated portrait of game design, one that shows what developers can accomplish when they not only understand the rules, but also how to bend them. Hey everybody, thank you for watching my video on Layers of Fear. If you enjoyed it, remember to like, favorite, comment, subscribe, and share. Any feedback or spreading of the word that you can provide would be most appreciated. If you want to see my last video on Fear, First Encounter Assault Recon, there's a link right there in the middle of the screen for you. And you can also visit me and my friend Matt's Let's Play channel, What the Fuck Game. In fact, we actually did do an LP of Layers of Fear for our Halloween marathon, the 13 Spooks of October. So you can watch that if you want. Thanks again for watching, folks, and have a good one.